Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to What If Ash Was a Martial Artist. So Ash would arrive in the Indigo Plateau after obtaining all of his 8 badges required in order to compete in the Pokemon League. And there he would meet his friendly rival Jeff, as they would have a conversation and talk about how they earned all of their badges. As Ash would talk about how he worked very hard and how he earned all of his badges, even beating Sabrina, as Jeff would be shocked as he said that he intentionally avoided the psychic gym and then just defeated like one of those knockoff gyms, like gyms that aren't very common, but gyms with badges that are still counted in the Pokemon League. Then Ash would say that he actually defeated Sabrina. This would shock Jeff, as nobody had really defeated Sabrina. Nobody in the fighting like dojo, meaning that Ash is like one of the strongest of them, which would really shock Jeff. He would say, "Wow, you beat Sabrina? Oh my god!" Now that is something that a lot of us cannot even hope to do. Then, meanwhile, they were having a conversation behind a familiar figure would approach, and as it would be Khan, as then he would say, "Oh, hello Ash, and hello Jeff, haven't seen you in a while." As then Ash would say, "Oh, look who's here, if it isn't Khan." As then Khan would say, "Did you collect all 8 badges?" And then Ash would say, yeah, but they're not just 8 badges. There are lots of different gyms, but I collected the required amount to enter the Pokemon League." As then he would go and turn his attention to Jeff, as he would say, "Oh, if it isn't Mr. Second Fiddle himself, Jeff. Back in the dojo, I always remember how you couldn't keep up to me, even though you were in the dojo for just as long as I was. You could never keep up with me. You were always the second best. That's the thing about you. You're never really the best, are you?" But Jeff wouldn't be really affected by this comment, as it would be coming from the guy who literally quit the dojo when his uncle said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be choosing you for sponsorship." So then Jeff would say, "Am I supposed to care?" But it's coming from the guy who ran away from the dojo when his uncle didn't choose him. This would annoy Khan very much. He would clench his fist as he would get ready to land a haymaker on Jeff. But then the referee, or like the Indigo League supervisors would say, "Calling all contestants. Kane, Ash Ketchum, Jeff, arrive at your posts." As then the first to leave would of course be Khan, and this would surprise Jeff that he had changed his name to Kane. As then Ash would say that he did change his name. He told me the last time we met. As then they'd all go to their posts. Ash would battle Mandy. As then Ash would use Krogunk against Mandy's Executor. Executor would go for lots of side beams for the attack advantage, but Toxicroak could avoid all of them and would land a critical hit with a poison jab, which would knock out Executor. As then Mandy would send out Kingdra. As then Kingdra would use multiple hydro pumps, which would do a lot of damage to Krogunk, because then Krogunk would come in and would use a Brick Break, which would send Seadra back, as then Seadra would wait for Krogunk to come in and finish off the job with a poison jab, And when Krogan was in close enough range and in the mindset that could easily be defeated, it would launch an ice beam, which would freeze the frog. And then Toxicroak would completely be frozen. And by the way, I'm sorry that I keep calling it Krogunk. And then it would be trapped in a frozen block. Ash would say, "Come on, can you please fall out and use poison jab?" But as you could see in the block, they'll be able to see that Krogunk was trying to move. You could see a slight movement, but it just wouldn't be able to resist the ice. As then, Mandy would call force cold, which would burn the ice, which would melt the ice and defeat Krogunk. As then, Ash would send out Hariyama. Hariyama would use multiple arm thrusts, which would send Sidra back. As then, Sidra would try to burn Hariyama with his cold. And side note, this Hariyama doesn't have guts. All Pokemon, other than Ash's Machamp, will not have guts because in this story, guts is a special ability in Ash's team, specifically from Machamp. But Hariyama, when this cold was launched, would use its flat hands, massive and flat surfaced hands, to like hold the cold at bay, as it would like thrust its hands forward to make a flat surface, which would deflect this cold back at Sidra, which would then cause a burn. As then, Sidra will be afflicted with the burn. As then, Hariyama will put it out of its misery with a brick break. So then we would see Mandy send out his Golbat. Golbat would fly all over the battlefield, thinking that it was going to win. But Ash was quite prepared for if like a Golbat or like a Crobat came up against him with Hariyama. He had taught it Bulk Up, so he would tell it to use Bulk Up multiple turns. Mandy would try use like Wing Attacks and Wing Attacks against Hariyama, but they wouldn't do anything as they keep bulking up and bulking up. As then, a yellow outline would appear around its muscles, showing that it had maxed out the size and strength of its muscles. As then, the yellow outline would disappear, showing how it had truly absorbed the gains. As then, Ash would call for a brick break, which would instantly knock out Golbat. As then, Mandy would go and congratulate Ash on the win, as both trainers would shake their hands as Mandy would say, "You're quite a great fighting type trainer. I heard about a trainer in the Go League who apparently beat Sabrina. Like, she was such a tough trainer. When I got there, she defeated me with only her Mr. Mime. So I'm not surprised that the person who supposedly beat Sabrina, who is obviously you, beat me in such a fashion." As then, I should move on to the rock field and would battle a Nidorino. Well, about this Nidorino, we don't really know much about how the battle went, but I'm just going to say that Poliwrath beat the Nidorino easily with an Ice Punch and a Hydro Pump. So yeah, let's move on to the match with the infamous Pete Pearlman. So Pete would come into the battle as he would introduce himself to Ash. As then, Ash would use Primeape against Pete's Shellder. Cloyster. And to put this in the most friendly way possible, I'm just going to say that Primeape pummeled Shellder with close combat. It was pummeled. Cloyster was pummeled so bad it had to use a withdrawal to try and protect itself. But Primate's onslaught with constant dynamic punches was beating up the shell, as withdrawal really wasn't saving it. So Pete, realizing that this was basically torture, would immediately return his cloister when he saw that its shell was cracking, not wanting to actually hurt it too much by making it battle against such a Pokemon like Primeape. So he would then say, "Now Ash, let me show you my powerhouse, Arcanine." As an Arcanine will come with an extreme speed, which would do decent damage to Primeape, as then Primeape would respond with a bunch of close combat, which would send Arcanine back, as then Arcanine would use a Fire Blast from afar, which would send Primeape back, as then Arcanine would burn the ice field, not wanting Primeape to have anywhere to go, but Primeape would quickly jump on the surface, as then it would be trying to stay in one place so it doesn't make any subtle movements, as then Pete, thinking he had it in the bag, would use a Dragon Rage or in the water or on the water, which would cause like a massive tsunami, which would cause not a tsunami, but like a water tornado with dragon-like energy. And then Ash would command Primeape to spin and spin like a ballerina. And then when the Dragon Rage approached Primeape and began attacking Primeape, because Primeape was already spinning, it would turn the Dragon Rage in its direction, which would then cause Primeape to be enveloped by a dragon-like aura, as it had been controlling the Dragon Rage. As then Ash would call for it to use a dynamic punch into Dragon Rage, as then Primeape, coated in the dragon-like aura, would smash into Arcanine, knocking it out. This would absolutely shock Pete, as he had never battled somebody with such a level of strategy. As then we'd go on to the battle between Jeanette and her infamous Bellsprout that defeated Ash's Pikachu, the infamous Pokemon that beat so many legendaries and pseudo-legendaries. Like, to name a few examples, in Ash's battle against Elan in the Colors League Finals, it beat his Tyranitar and his Metagross despite being extremely weakened. And also in the battle against Tobias, the cheetah, who probably had like a 10 or like 6 action replays, he beat his Latios. And also against the battle of Tapu Koko, Pikachu beat Tapu Koko again with a Z move that wasn't very effective, but still annihilating that legendary Pokemon, Mele Island's Guardian. Even though at this period of time Pikachu was not nearly as strong, still, other than Charizard and Bulbasaur, it was like his strongest Kanto Pokemon. So to get into the battle, Ash would lead against Jeanette with his Ninetales, as he knew she was heavy with bugs and very strong vines and flowers. So he would use his one of his most powerful Pokemon, Ninetales. Ninetales would incinerate Beedrill with one flamethrower, instead she would send out Cypher. Cypher would be a lot faster and more stronger than Beedrill, so it would dart around the battlefield landing slashes and slashes. This wouldn't really do much to Ninetales, as when Cypher was trying to come in for a point-blank direct slash, Ninetales would launch one Fire Blast at the Cypher darting towards it, which would absolutely annihilate Cypher. And then Jeanette would send out her Bellsprout. Now this was the one that Ash was worried about, because he had heard that this Bellsprout alone had defeated like Magmars and Arcanines and defeated so many trainers to get to where it was in the tournament, and literally carried Jeanette despite not being involved. So when Bellsprout hit the ring, hit the battlefield. Ash knew that this wasn't any Pokemon to be playing around with. So it immediately called for a Fire Blast off the bat, which the elegant Bellsprout would immediately dodge. Ash would then call for a flurry of flamethrowers, as then Bellsprout would try to dodge them, but one would eventually hit it, which would then cause the almighty Bellsprout to decide to actually show its true power. It would then grab Ninetales' leg with a Vine Whip, and it would send it to the floor and smash it all around the battlefield. Ninetales would then, from afar, send a Fire Blast, which would be absolutely tanked by the legendary Bellsprout, as flames would be all around the battlefield. As then, Ash would call for a Giga Impact. This wouldn't be a very smart choice. But then, Bellsprout would get cocky and just stand there thinking that Ash wouldn't really be able to do anything to it. And then the moment it was hit by a Giga Impact, it was just defeated, because let's be real, Bellsprout's defense is not very good. And I'm pretty sure the only reason that Bellsprout actually got was in the tournament was because its opponents didn't really take it too seriously. And also, in this battle against Pikachu, electric types aren't very effective against grass types like Bellsprout. So, yeah, it was defeated that easily by Ninetales. Not really a shocker, because it's a Ninetales against a Bellsprout. But anyway, Jeanette would say that that was a great battle, and that she was shocked, not really shocked, but shocked a bit, that somebody had actually taken down her Bellsprout so fast. As then both trainers would shake their hands. As then I should move on to the real tournament, like, you know what I mean, like where all the battles happen in the main stadium. I should battle Richie, where he would use Poliwrath against Richie's Butterfree. Butterfree would try use Confusions and Sleep Powders, but Poliwrath would easily dodge and would knock it out instantly with an Ice Punch. As then Richie would send out his Parky, wanting to gain a type advantage with his strongest Pokemon. Sparky would then come in with a massive quick attack, which would do decent damage, and then he would try to use a Thunderbolt, but the intelligent Poliwrath would avoid the Thunderbolt, as then Poliwrath would use a Hydro Pulse, which would hit Sparky for decent damage, and then Sparky would decide to use its P to confuse Poliwrath, as Richie would want to confuse Poliwrath with its extreme zigzaggy speed, and then surprise it with a powerful Thunderbolt. As then Poliwrath would be trying to locate its target, as Pikachu was going all over the battlefield, like it was right, then it was left, then it was forwards, and then it was backwards. Pikachu was going so fast, it was confusing Poliwrath. Richie, seeing his opportunity, would lay the smack down with a powerful Thunderbolt. This would hit Poliwrath so hard it would barely be standing. And then Poliwrath, in a last-ditch effort, would launch like a Dynamic Punch in one hand and an Ice Punch in the other, as it would try and hit Pikachu, but Pikachu would be dodging the tired water fighting type. As then Poliwrath would be hit from behind with one last Thunderbolt, which would take it out. As then Ash would send out his Toxicroak. Toxicroak could then use a Poison Jab, which would hit Pikachu for a lot of damage, as Pikachu had actually been winded a bit by the Hydro Pump. As then Pikachu would then try and use a Thunderbolt, which would quickly be avoided by the speedy Toxicroak, who would hit it in the gut with a powerful Brick Break, which would send it flying. As then Pikachu would barely be standing, as then it would go for a quick attack, which would promptly be avoided, and as Toxicroak wasn't looking, it would hit for a Thunderbolt, which would do decent damage, but not as much as it would do to as it would have done to Polygraph, as no type advantage, and also Polygraph was was a bit more exhausted than Toxicroak was, as then Toxicroak would respond with a poison jab which would finish off Sparky, as then Richie would send out Zippo, his Charmander. Charmander would try do its best against the more experienced Toxicroak, but it just really cut it, as then they would try use flamethrowers and slashes, but Toxicroak would easily avoid them and would put it out of its misery with one poison jab, which would then give Ash the match, as then Richie would go and congratulate Ash on the amazing match. And just to put this out there, the reason why Ash beat Richie so handily, even though in the original timeline he's the guy who even knocked Ash out of the tournament, is because, if you ask me, Ash was like a stronger version of Richie. Like, Richie was basically Ash, but with a bit weaker team, that with a less evolved team, that actually listens to him all the time. The only reason that Ash lost in the original timeline was because of Charizard and his Pokemon were tied up by Team Rocket, because they were wanting to sabotage Ash and get Pikachu. But because the dynamic trio don't follow him all around the Pokemon world, Ash doesn't doesn't have anyone to tire out his Pidgeotto and the rest of his team like Squirtle and Pikachu, meaning that his good mods are pretty much fine. So, yeah. And Charizard isn't here this timeline, as Ash never found that rating Charmander on a rock. As grim as it might sound, I'm going to put a positive note on that and just put it out there that somebody else got that Charmander. Somebody that I might one day introduce to the story. Yeah. So, to conclude, Ash pretty much lost that battle, because even though his team was pretty much a lot stronger than Richie's, let's be real, Richie had Pokemon that actually respected him all the time and came better prepared and ready than Ash, because Ash was assaulted or like sabotaged by a trio of stalkers who want his Pikachu. So yeah, and he doesn't have Pikachu this time, and so let's move on to the next battle, which is going to be huge, as then it will be Ash versus Asunta. Ash would use Ninetales against Asunta's Venomoth, as then Venomoth would use multiple Psybeams. Only one would hit Ninetales, or would barely scratch it, as Ninetales would use one flamethrower, which would instantly take out Venomoth, as then Asunta would send out Tentacle. Tentacle would use lots and lots of water guns, which would do a lot of damage over time. But then Ninetales would use one Fire Blast, which would send Poliwrath back, as the Tentacle. Tentacle would barely be on its two tentacles, as it would try go for another water gun, which would promptly be avoided and responded with a point blank flamethrower, which would finish it off, as then Asunta would send out her strongest Pokemon, Ivysaur. Ivysaur would, seeing how weak Ninetales was, would use lots of Razor Leafs, and since Ninetales' fur was quite soaked and softer, the Razor Leafs would do a lot more damage, as then Ninetales would respond with multiple flamethrowers, which would do a lot of damage to Ivysaur, but not as much as they should be, as it was weakened. As then we would see that Ninetales was quite weakened, as the fresh Ivysaur that's only taken a few flamethrowers would pretty much be ready to go. As then Asunta, seeing the quick advantage that she can take at the opportunity that she has, she would call for Ivysaur to use the biggest solar beam that it could ever have, knowing that this would annihilate the weakened Ninetales. Ninetales would just be breathing heavily, and Ash wouldn't even know if Ninetales would be able to take or dodge the attack. As then, Asunta's Ivysaur would keep absorbing solar energy. It would absorb so much energy that it would begin to evolve into Venusaur. As then, it would glow, being consumed by solar energy as it would grow in size with its flower and evolve into Venusaur. Venusaur, after its evolution, would launch a powerful solar beam. Ash, realizing what he needed to do, would then call for Ninetales to use Flamethrower on the ground, and this would send Ninetales into the air a bit, giving it a little, making it avoid the solar beam. As then Ash would use Fire Blast up in the air, which would hit Venusaur, but Venusaur would avoid it. As then Ninetales would land on the floor as it would be knocked out, as it had expended all of its energy on that last Fire Blast. Ash would actually catch his Ninetales before it fell down, wanting to protect it, as it landed on him. As then Ash would return his Ninetales, saying, "You did a good job, buddy, but now it's time for someone else to step in." As then Ash would send out Poliwrath. Poliwrath would use one Ice Punch, which would knock out the weakened Venusaur, as Venusaur had actually been weakened a decent bit by Ninetales' flamethrowers. As then Asunta would come and would say, "Wow, now that was a great match. I really enjoyed that. It's rare that I see trainers who actually care about their Pokemon so much that they even hurt themselves to reduce their Pokemon's pain. That was a great match." As then both trainers would shake hands as Ash would get ready for his battle against his rival, Jeff. Ash would and Jeff would start off with a real battle full of firepower. Ninetales against Infernape. You'll both start between a clash between Flamethrower and Flamethrower. This will cause an explosion. The explosion would affect both Pokemon, as then Ash would call for Giga Impact, as then Jeff would call for a close combat. Both moves would collide, doing even damage to both Pokemon. Ninetales would be resting, as then Infernape would try to take advantage of one Flamethrower. This would hit Ninetales for not a lot of damage, as then Ninetales would respond with a Flamethrower of its own, which would also do a lot of damage to Infernape. As then Ninetales would come with a Giga Impact, but in the middle of the move, it would stop the Giga Impact and would use a point blank Flamethrower, which would send Infernape back. As then Infernape would come with a close combat, which would hit Ninetales. As then Ash would not use a move, but instead tell Ninetales to hit Infernape with its tails, which would send Infernape back. As then Ash would call for a Flamethrower. As then Infernape would also use a Flamethrower. Both moves would hit both Pokemon, sending them back with a lot of damage as they were both tired. As then both trainers, realizing that it was time to end this, would call for their ultimate moves. Ash would use Fire Blast, as Infernape would use Blast Burn. Both moves would hit both Pokemon for even damage, which would knock out both Pokemon. As even though this was just the first match, the crowd would be clapping their hands, whooping, as they would go wild from the massive fiery surprise that they had just witnessed. A reference to the episode where Ash's Torracat evolved, like fiery surprises, you know. Anyway, Ash would send out his Toxicroak against Heracross. Heracross would try to use multiple horn attacks, which would do decent damage to Toxicroak, as Toxicroak could respond with lots of poison jabs and brick breaks, which would knock out Heracross. As then Toxicroak was a bit exhausted from that, but he had managed to land a flurry of poison jabs and brick breaks, which do a lot of damage to Heracross. Then Jeff had sent out one of his stronger Pokemon, Halucha, or Holucha, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it Halucha. As then Halucha would start off with a powerful wing attack, which would do a lot of damage. As then Toxicroak could respond with a poison jab, which would do a lot of damage to the Luchador Pokemon. As then Halucha would be sent back. As then Halucha would then jump and use a high jump kick, which would do a lot of damage to Toxicroak, as it was still disoriented from the wing attack, as it wouldn't be able to dodge high jump kick, which is a quite dodgeable move. As then Toxicroak would try go for a poison jab, which would only hurt Halucha's arm a little bit. As then Halucha would respond with a flying press, which would press Toxicroak down, knocking it out. As then Ash would send out his Poliwrath. Poliwrath would then go for an Ice Punch, which would hit Halucha, as Halucha would also go for a wing attack. Both moves would collide, as the Ice Punch would injure Halucha's wing, meaning that it wasn't able to fly anymore. Halucha would only be left with high jump kick, cross chop, and X Scissor, which isn't the best arsenal against a fighting type when it has moves like wing attack. As then Halucha would go for a high jump kick, which would easily be avoided by Poliwrath, as Halucha would end up hurting itself. The Luchador would be quite damaged, as then it would come in for a cross chop, which wouldn't do much to Poliwrath, as Poliwrath would just tank the hit and use a point blank Hydro Pump, which would completely take out Halucha. As then Jeff would send out his Lucario. This Lucario would have been taught Thunder Punch, as Jeff had wanted to beat lots of opponents like water types with his Lucario, as this would become an all-out fighting type battle. As then it would start between a clash between Dynamic Punch and Thunder Punch. Both Pokemon would come close to each other, as Lucario would land a Thunder Punch, as Poliwrath would land a Dynamic Punch. As then Lucario would land a Thunder Punch, as Poliwrath would land a Dynamic Punch. Both Pokemon would be pummeling each other with Thunder Punches and Dynamic Punches respectively, as then they would send each other back. As then they would clash with Hydro Pump and Aura Sphere, which would hit both Pokemon for even damage. They would then come in with Extreme Speed and Ice Punch, which would hit both Pokemon for even damage. As then Lucario would jump up in the air and would go for a high jump kick, which would shock Poliwrath and Ash. As then Jeff would say that he found this Lucario as an egg in the wild, which would shock Ash. As then when the high jump kick will come, we would see Poliwrath in response use a Dynamic Punch, as both moves would hit both Pokemon for even damage. As then Ash will call for a Hydro Pump, as Jeff will call for Lucario to use a Aura Sphere. Both moves would hit both Pokemon, as both Pokemon will barely be standing, so both trainers would want to end this. Lucario will Thunder Punch and Poliwrath with a Dynamic Punch. Both moves will collide, which would knock out both Pokemon. As then Ash would send out Hariyama against Jeff's Beware. Jeff would say that Beware was one of his strongest Pokemon, and he found it as a Stuffle near to a berry garden. As then Ash would say, "Nice, I found this Hariyama in a cave," as both trainers would notice that both Pokemon were quite strong and would want to know where they're from. as then Ash would call for a brick break, as Jeff would call for a hammer round. Both moves would collide with both Pokemon, which would cause even damage on both sides. As then Beware would use a takedown, which would hit Hariyama's. Then Hariyama would use a bunch of arm thrusts, which would hit Beware. As then Beware would grab Hariyama's hand that just used an arm thrust and would swing it around and send it flying with a brutal swing, which would cause a hole in the stadium. As then Hariyama would have taken a lot of damage and would jump out of the hole and would charge in or brick break, which would hit Beware. As then Beware would respond with a hammer arm of its own. As then Ash would call for a seismic toss. As then Hariyama would begin to spin with Beware. As then Beware would begin to also use a brutal swing. Both Pokemon would send each other flying, but it would be obvious that Beware's brutal swing had done a bit more damage. As then both trainers would decide it's time to end this with a hammer arm and a brick break. When both Pokemon collided, it seemed like they were both about to fall. But Beware would fall first, and then Hariyama would fall. The referee was about to call it a double knockout, but Beware just turned up, as if there was no damage done to it at all, which would shock the crowd. As then, Jeff would laugh a bit embarrassed, as he would say, "Oh, that's the thing with my Beware. It commonly just acts like it's fainted to play and playfully because it sees a lot of battles as a game." As then Beware would grab a massive looking juicy massive citrus berry as it would chomp down on it, as its health would be completely restored, which would shock Ash, as citrus berries are not supposed to really restore health 100%. As then Jeff would say, "Oh, I remember when I told you Beware's from a berry farm, yeah? It took along a lot of citrus berries, so in a lot of battles like this where it wins, it eats a citrus berry to regain energy." As then Ash would send out his Primeape, and then this would be a very tough battle, as Primeape would start off with a dynamic punch, as Beware would start off with a hammer arm. Both Pokemon would do even damage to each other, as then they would send each other skidding back. As then Primeape would come again with a close combat, which would send Beware flying back, showing that Primeape was stronger than Hariyama. As then Beware would come with a takedown, which would send Primeape back, as then Primeape would sweep Beware's leg with a low kick. As then Beware would fall down, as they would jump right back up and use a brutal swing, which would send Primeape right back, because then Primeape would be sent back into the same hole in the stadium that Hariyama was in. As then Hariyama would jump, as then Primeape would jump right out of the hole like there was no damage on it at all, which would shock Beware and Jeff. As then Ash would call for a close combat, as Jeff would call for a hammer arm. Both moves would collide, as then Beware was down, as Primeape was still up, showing how strong Primeape really is. As then Jeff would say, "This battle has been fun, but it's now time for me to show you my true power," as he would grab a Pokeball, as he would look at it, remembering when he received his Tyrogue from not from his professor, but from Sensei Kyo. Instead, he would throw the Pokeball, revealing a Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee would come towards Primeape and would kick it in the face with a Mega Kick, which would send it flying back. Primeape would try and use close combats and dynamic punches, but they would be avoided by the limbo Hitmonlee. Then Hitmonlee would finish it off with a rolling kick, which would knock out Primeape. As then Ash would send out his starter Pokemon, a Champ, as then this would be a real battle, as then both Pokemon would look at each other with respect in their eyes, admiring the new level of strength they had been. As the last battle that they had, it would be Ash's Machop against Jeff's Tyrogue. the Tyroku evolved in the middle of the battle, which tied with Machamp as a Machop, as then both trainers will call for Mega Punch and Mega Kick. Both moves will collide with several Pokemon back, as then Ash will call for a Cross Chop, as Prime will come in and would use a close combat, as would use a lot of kicks, as then both moves would send both Pokemon back evenly, as both Pokemon were affected a lot. Ash would then call for Dynamic Punches, as then Jeff would call for lots of rolling kicks. Both moves would attack each other. Both Pokemon would attack each other constantly with both moves, as Hitmonlee would keep rolling and kicking, as Machamp would keep punching with its forearms. Instead, they would send both of each other back, both tired. Both trainers, realizing that it was time to end this, would call for close combat and cross chop respectively, as then when the moves collided, Hitmonlee was knocked out, as Machamp would quickly jump to its corner right next to its trainer after winning the match for Ash. Ash would hug his Machamp, excited that he won against Jeff, as then he would go and shake Jeff's hand, thanking him for the epic battle, as Jeff would also thank him for the battle. As then it would be time for Ash versus Khan, the finals. As then Ash would be ready for this battle, knowing that this was probably going to be his toughest yet, as Khan was a ruthless trainer who was very powerful and showed no mercy against anyone. Both trainers would stand on both sides of the battlefield, as then Ash would send out Toxicroak against Khan's Mienshao. Mienshao would come for a high jump kick, which would hit Toxicroak, because then Toxicroak would respond with a poison jab, which would do a lot of damage, as then Mienshao would come in for a karate chop, which would easily be avoided, as it would then be hit in the gut with a poison jab. This would poison Mienshao, as then Khan would yell at it, "You pathetic fighting type, resist that!" As Mienshao was suffering, but hearing these words and not wanting to see the wrath of its trainer, it would quickly try to snap out of its pain, as it would come in for a high jump kick, which would be promptly avoided, as it would be finished off by a brick break. Khan would be shocked how his Mienshao was taken down so easily by Ash's Toxicroak, so it then returned to his form and would say, "How pathetic you are. Now see how real battles are fought." As then he would send out Gallade. Instead, Gallade would send lots of Psycho Cuts against Toxicroak, which would do a lot of damage to Toxicroak. Toxicroak, barely standing, would come in for a poison jab, as then it would hit Gallade, as then Gallade would respond with a brick break, which would do decent damage to Toxicroak. Toxicroak would barely be on its 2 feet, as it would be breathing heavily, as then it would be finished off with a slash. As then Ash would send out his Ninetales, as the Ninetales would use multiple flamethrowers, which would burn Gallade a lot. As then Gallade would send out lots of Psycho Cuts and Psychics, which would send Ninetales back. As the Ninetales would come in for Giga Impact, as Gallade would come in for a slash. When both moves collided, Gallade was down. As then Khan would send out his Pangoro. Ninetales would be currently weakened, as then Khan, also known as Kane by the Pokemon League representatives, or officials, would use a Night Slash against Ash's Ninetales, which would do a lot of damage. Then Ninetales would quickly regain its energy and respond with a powerful Fire Blast, which would send back Pangoro. As then Pangoro would try coming for a Focus Punch, as then it would wait. As then it would come in for a Focus Punch, which would be countered by a Point Blank Flamethrower, which would send back both Pokemon. As then Pangoro would use another Light Slash, as Ninetales would use a Giga Impact. This would send both Pokemon back, as Ninetales would be resting, as then Pangoro would come for a Night Slash, which would be avoided by Ninetales surprisingly said as the Ninetales regained its energy and would finish off Pangoro with a flamethrower. But at the last second, Pangoro would hit with a surprise Hyper Beam. As then, both Pokemon were out. As then, Ash and Poliwrath would go against Khan and Crabominable. Crabominable would use lots of power-up punches, trying to gain attack by hitting Poliwrath. But Poliwrath would avoid most of them, as one would hit as the Poliwrath would respond with its own dynamic punch, which would send Crabominable back for a lot of damage. As then, Ash would call for a Hydro Pump as Khan would call for an Ice Beam. Both moves would do even damage to both Pokemon. As then, Crabominable would use an Ice Punch, which would do a lot of damage to Poliwrath. Then Poliwrath would respond with its own Ice Punch, which wouldn't do as much because of Stab, as same type attack bonus as Crabominable had Stab in Ice Punch, meaning that it would automatically do more damage. As then, Ash will respond with a dynamic punch, which would send Crabominable back. As then, both trainers will call for Hydro Pump and Ice Beam. When both moves hit both Pokemon, a massive dust cloud would appear. As then, when it settled, Crabominable was down as Poliwrath was was up. As then, it would be Poliwrath against Breloom. Breloom would use a Leech Seed, which would seed Poliwrath, as its energy would be sapped. As then, Poliwrath would come in and hit Breloom with an Ice Punch, which would send it back. Breloom would then charge a Solar Beam, which would hit Poliwrath for a decent chunk of damage. A lot of damage is then. Poliwrath would come in with an Ice Punch, which would do a decent chunk of damage to Breloom. So Breloom would finish off with a Mark Punch. As then, Ash would send out Primeape. The now obedient Primeape would easily defeat Breloom with a combination of a Dynamic Punch and a Close Combat. As then, Khan would send out his last Pokemon, Hitmonchan, wanting to save it for the last, save it as the last Pokemon, as it was the strongest. As then, Hitmonchan would come in for lots of Fire Punches and Thunder Punches. As then, Ash would use lots of close combats in response to this, which would send both Pokemon back with equal damage. Hitmonchan would come with a Mega Punch as Primeape would come in with a Dynamic Punch. Both moves would collide, sending back equal damage to both Pokemon. As then, Hitmonchan would come in with a Fire Punch as then Primeape would come in with its own Mega Punch, which would do equal damage to both Pokemon. As then, Ash would call for Close Combat, as Khan would also call for Close Combat. Both moves would collide, which would cause both Pokemon to barely be standing in the middle of the battlefield. When it looked like Hitmonchan was about to fall, it would support itself and stand back up barely, as then Primeape, having taken a decent chunk of damage, would fall. As then, Ash would send out his Machamp, because Hitmonchan was way too tired to compete against a Pokemon like Machamp. With one Karate Chop, not a Karate Chop, with one Mega Punch, it was over for Khan. As then, Ash would be crowned the winner of the Indigo Conference. As then, when Ash came to shake Khan's hand, Khan would say, "Get the hell away from me," as he would run out of the stadium, very angry. As then, Ash would want to go after him, but then Kyo would say, "Wait, Ash, don't go after him yet. I want to go have a talk with him." As then, Kyo would quickly congratulate Ash and then follow his nephew. As then, Ash and Machamp would look at each other, knowing after a few minutes that it was time to go. As then, Ash would thank Machamp for all it had all that he had done. Instead, they would both go outside. As then, they would check the outside of the Indigo Plateau. As then, they would see, sitting on a bench, Kyo and Khan. As Khan was complaining about how, I was talking about how, oh my God, why'd you kick me out of the dojo, man? I'm your own nephew. Why did you choose these people over me who aren't even related to you? As then Kyo began to explain his reasoning. And then Khan would slowly begin to understand, but his heart would be thinking instead of his brain. As then he would say, I understand your point, but why? And why the hell do you think that loser Ash is better than me? As then Kyo would say, remember all those years ago when I told you why Ash was better than you? First off, he's kinder than you. And second off, he is more open to learning and accepting when someone else is better than him, unlike you. I saw what you were doing what you were trying to do with Jeff when you first saw him. It's good he put you in your place because, Khan, I don't know how you got like this. You were always like one of the nicest kids I knew in the family, and then now you're this alpha jerk. I don't know what happened to you, man. As then, they'll be listening. As then, Ash and Machamp would be listening to the conversation and watching. As then, Khan would still be angry. As then, the moment he saw Ash, he would immediately stand up and get out and come in front of him and say, why the hell are you here? How long have you been standing here? And Ash would say, oh, just been standing here a few minutes. As then, I would say, oh, you think you're better than me, huh? As then Ash would say, oh, I am better than you in Pokemon battling, not gonna lie. And you haven't been in the dojo for a little while, so I won't be surprised if I beat you. And do you really want to know why you're not as good as me in Pokemon battling? It's because you're a jerk in general, Khan. Like your uncle just told you, you're not just a jerk to Pokemon, but to everyone around you. When somebody tells you this person's better than you do not want to accept it. You always see yourself as the number one. You're one of the most egotistical people I know. And that's your undoing. As then Khan would get annoyed. So would say, oh, you think you're better than me, huh? In battling. Let's see what you can really do in a man-to-man fight. Fist-to-fist. A throwdown. No Pokemon. A real fight. As then, Machamp and Kyo, understanding what was about to happen, would step aside as Kyo would approve of Ash teaching Khan a lesson. As then, Khan would start off with a roundhouse kick, which would quickly be dodged by Ash. As then, Ash would go for a gut punch, which would be blocked by Khan. Khan would then go for a haymaker, which would also be blocked by Ash. As then, Ash would gut punch Khan, which would send him back. As then Khan would come in for a flurry of kicks, forward kicks and roundhouse kicks, which would be blocked and dodged by Ash. As then Ash would catch his leg and would spin him around and throw him. As then Khan would catch his balance. As then he would rebuild momentum and sweep Ash's leg. As then Ash would get on the floor and perform a donkey kick to Khan's face, which would send him back. As then Khan would come with a haymaker, which would also be dodged by Ash. As then Ash would uppercut him. As then Khan want to finish Ash with a flying tornado kick. As then he would jump up in the air, spinning. As then Ash would catch him and would throw him down, defeating him. Khan would say, finish me, beat me. As then Ash would say, no, I'm not like you. I'm not going to beat someone who's already defeated. If you really want to become better, you need to stop being such a jerk and finally accept that people are better than you. And you need to leave the past behind you. Okay? What happened back then shouldn't define our relationship from now on. So can you just stop living in the past and move on? As then Khan would just sit there and listen. As then Ash would go to collect his first place trophy and talk to Mr. Good Show and talk about the Elite Four. As then Ash would be celebrated as number one and would get his trophy. As then Khan would come and talk to Ash and would say, "No what, man, you are right. Next time next time we see each other, I want to have a battle. And from now on let's start anew." As Ash would come to shake his hand, as then Khan would walk away saying, "We're not there yet." As then Ash would have a small smile seeing that Khan had listened. As then he would go and talk to Mr. Goodshow. As then Mr. Goodshow would ask him if he's going to challenge for the champion title. As then Ash would say, "Not right now. I'm going to go and train in Johto. And then I'm going to come back and show the world the strength of Saffron City and Ash Ketchum." As then Ash would be leaving. As then he'd think about, when I battle Lance, I will teach him a lesson, as as he was such a jerk about it, about us kicking us out of the gym and making us just a mere dojo. As then Ash would leave. Okay, I really enjoyed making this video, and also the reason why I'm uploading this today and making this today is because I have a lot of time on my hands today, and I wasn't able to upload on Sunday and Saturday. Saturday because I was busy. When I tried making it on Sunday, it just didn't work. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye.